That's, I always like to talk after the slot, after lunch. Everybody's still feeling pretty good, and the food coma doesn't usually set in for another 30 minutes, so I figure I've got you for a good 15. My name is Scott Spalding. I work with Quantcast, and today we're going to be talking through what we've learned as a company by serving a good amount of impressions when it comes to viewability. All right, AV guys. Gotta love technical difficulties when you're, there we go, now we're moving. So today we're continuing the conversation around viewability. That's one topic I really enjoy talking about, mainly because on the vendor side, no vendor wants to be known as a vendor that's making money from serving non-viewable ads. And on the advertiser side, it's always good to be able to know you guys are getting value for the advertising you're paying for. So before I jump into it and talk about the findings of serving so many impressions and focusing around viewability, I figured I'd give a quick insight into the lens that I'll be speaking from today. And for those of you that don't know Quantcast, our origins are in measurement. We help our publishers understand their audiences much more than they would if they didn't have a measurement solution. And we use that to help feed our advertising. In our advertising side of our business, it is a suite of audience targeting solutions. So knowing that's where we're coming from, we'll just get going. I like to set expectations quite early, especially for those folks that have not really dove into setting viewability metrics, mainly because a lot of folks believe reaching 100% viewability today is possible. And right now, I want to point out that it's very, very highly improbable, borderline impossible, mainly because the definition that the MRC has set today, and I'll get into a little bit more than that. I do want to break this down a little bit further and point out that billing on 100% viewable impressions is very possible, and that is done by a good amount of vendors today. But having every single impression that's delivered be seen and verified as viewable is impossible because of the length of time the ad must stay on the page. So what do I mean by that? MRC's definition, and you're going to hear a lot of three-letter acronyms, and I know everybody has their bingo cards out there, so I'm going to really try to not have somebody stand up in the room and yell bingo for some of the words that I'm saying today. But the MRC defines the viewability of an ad having 50% of the pixels on the page for more than 1 second. The reason I want to level set on this is because various holding companies have their own definition of this, mainly Group M. But for the most part, let's stick with this definition today. Generally, before I like to dig into our findings and just being somebody who appreciates history, I thought we'd start by focusing on how we got to this point. Roughly 2006, there was a company called RealView. RealView started the first measurement of a viewable ad. MRC meaning Media Ratings Council, then came out with a statement saying, the demand is there for viewability, but unfortunately the technology and the monitoring of that is not quite ready for prime time yet. The 3MS definition came out. 3MS stands for Making Measurement Make Sense. And this group of folks got together and they started putting the criteria together on what you saw on the previous slide on what deems a viewable ad. MRC started accrediting vendors, and early of the part of last year, they deemed it on the display side that viewability was ready for prime time, and toward the second half of last year that viewability for video was ready for prime time. A couple main benefits when it comes to viewability. Some are quite obvious. Economics is a big one. Being able to save money on ad serving, being able to pay the publishers that have ads that are regularly viewable, get more money so they can make more money, produce more available content for advertisers is important. On the direct response side, it's important because this way you'll be paying for the conversion event that you really, from influencing a true ad, whereas in the case of paying for ads below the fold and having to work with attribution scorecards and whatnot and getting false attribution, we do not want that. All right, so getting down to the meat of what we're here to talk about today, we had served on average about 1 billion impressions a month across 300 different clients, 10,000 publishers, and across the major RTB exchanges. I'm going to not name the RTB exchanges just because they had asked us not to show this because some of these findings can be a little surprising. I'll be showing one of three visuals today when it comes to these graphs. The first one, I want to point out that some advertisers do believe this, that the above the fold setting on the exchanges is a really good proxy and setting to enable viewability. I want to point out that this is not the case. If you see the top three major exchanges that are out there today, you'll see that only 65% of the inventory was deemed as viewable when that setting was in play, and that was the highest of the three, the lowest being 44%. This can be attributed to the time spent on the page where the user has to see the ad for at least 1 second. Another reason for this could be miscategorization of sites, and there are a couple other smaller reasons in there as well that I imagine you guys can figure those out. There is a very limited supply of very high viewable inventory. If you see these 4 different columns here, this is how we've bucketed the different publishers based on the average viewability rate, if you see toward the bottom. So it's pretty alarming to see that roughly 78% of the publishers that we had been bidding on for this study, the average viewability was between 0 and 50%. And now it's not because these publishers are on purpose trying to dupe anybody. The supply infrastructure, unfortunately, just is not there today. It's getting better every day and every month, but to say that only roughly 22% of the publishers across these billions of ads that we've been serving were above that 50% threshold is a little alarming, especially because of all the hype and the demand for viewability as it stands today. So with the scarcity of this viewable inventory comes a very, very high premium. And if you think in terms of the equilibrium of the supply and demand, you're going to be paying an extremely high price for, I would say, more guaranteed viewability or closer toward that guaranteed end of the spectrum. If you look at this graph right here, we did not want to release the rates, again, from the exchanges that we had been working with. They'd asked us not to. But the 100 number right in the middle, that's the average CPM rate on the exchanges. So we'll just call that roughly $1 just for this exercise. So to get in the range of 25 to 50% viewability for that publisher grouping that we had, let's call that $1. To get just above that 75 to that 100% in that range of viewability, which is incrementally roughly 26% more than that 100, you're paying almost double. Again, the supply infrastructure is not 100% ready for prime time across exchanges today for viewability. So what we've learned. MRC accredited vendors can now measure up to 93% of all impressions on exchanges. The average viewability on exchanges tends to be in that 30 to 50% range. We're going to see that creeping up little by little over the next couple months and the years. The obvious statement here is better viewability drives better performance. One point on the fourth one here, which I probably have found to be the most interesting, is that taking into all the different aspects and the variables into play when you are running a campaign, the average viewability, the ideal viewability range today is between 55% and 65% if you have a setting being set. And this is, again, through the lens of Quantcast. And it's not to say that we're endorsing non-viewable ads, because we're not by any means, but taking in terms of the back-end metrics, the ROI, the return on ad spend, how much that inventory costs, especially in that second grouping that we showed on the slide prior. This seems to get the most bang out of your buck for your money on the advertiser side today. I do expect this range to go up from 55% to 65%, and that range should creep up, hopefully 60 to 65% in the next month, and hopefully we get up to that 70% range quite soon. And then lastly on this slide, attribution. Outside of Last Touch, and especially with the proliferation of all the different attribution vendors that are in the space today, this is a big gap when it comes to viewability. If you're running a campaign with 10 different vendors on the plan, it's really important to keep a level playing field across all the vendors, and making sure that they're all at the same viewability range, because what that will then happen if that range is not set on the viewability side, a lot of these vendors are going to be able to take credit for ads that are not seen, when the vendors that are showing just viewable ads are not getting they're not getting the value that they deserve. So my recommendation as we as we talk to many advertisers, and we're flying around the country and having lots of these great conversations, is, to me, it's a 3-step process. The first step is, understand the current viewability of your campaigns. Don't just dive in and say, we want to put a viewability metric in, because it could be doing a lot more damage than good. Understand what that current benchmark is. It's probably going to be in that 30 to 50% range, which isn't probably going to make everybody all that happy, but it's a good thing to know where you start so you know where to go. The second thing is once you've identified what that benchmark is, push the envelope a little bit more until you can establish what that right range is. And that range is going to be different depending on the vertical you're in. It's going to depend on the type of campaign you're running, direct response and branding. You're going to want to push viewability a little bit more right now on the upper end of this range for branding than you would on direct response. And then, lastly, a viewable CPM, it doesn't make sense for everybody, and it can do much more harm than good if you just jump into saying, I only want to run impressions that are 100% viewable, given all the different economics and the costs that are associated with serving, having ads serving 30 or 40% of your ads being served, but you're having to pay for the ad serving, but yet they're being blocked. And my last point is, right now, we're going to look back 5 or 6 years from now, and we're going to think to ourselves that we actually it's amazing we had to optimize toward a viewability metric when that's just going to be the way things are in the future. Publishers are going to be able to just get a good amount of their inventory out there. The ones that are doing it right are going to make more for their inventory. They're going to get more demand for that inventory, and it's going to be less about having ads be viewable, and it's going to be more about optimizing toward getting the attention of the consumers on those ads that already are viewable, because that's the way things are and the way things should be. That's it. That's all I have, guys.
Great. We do have a few minutes for some questions, if there are any. Just raise your hand. I have one. What about mobile and viewability? Like, to make things easier, make things harder?
I would say, from what we've seen here, mobile is definitely making things a little bit more challenging when it comes to the cross-device conversations. One company we found that's doing it very, very well on the mobile side, as well as once we did this evaluation of all these MRC accredited publishers, is that Moat was the one company at the top of the heap in terms of their accuracy on viewability for both display and on mobile.
So what exactly was it that they were doing right?
Honestly, it was just lining them up, going head-to-head against all the other MRC accredited vendors, and because of that, there's a reason their reputation has gotten as big as it has been. They're just doing things very, very well. They've invested a lot in their technology, and it shows.
Cool. I also saw a hand up over there, I think. Here's a hand, too.
Travis from Marchex. 2 questions. One is, I was going to ask about the mobile versus desktop. I didn't know if you broke that out or what your viewpoint on that was. But adjusted for viewability, is it better to pay the higher price in terms of outcomes and actions for consumers? Because if you do the math, it seems like it suggests it's not more expensive. It's actually it's less expensive when you adjust it for the viewability, which would assume a better outcome, better chance of an outcome. So that was the first question. And second is, what do you think of WPP's stance on this? And so how do you see that unfolding?
The first question, I do think it makes more sense in that range of that 55 to 65%. What we've pointed that out is just because the economics of it stands today. It's hard to swallow to think that it's okay to be in that range of viewability, because it's not a lot. 55 to 65% is not a lot just in general. But if you're focusing on direct response and taking into account the ad serving, the other intermediary costs, the monitoring technologies, the supply infrastructure as it stands today, we found that that's the equilibrium ideal price point for maximizing true ROI. Not just we think we're getting that ROI, but knowing that this person that did convert did see an ad, but attribution plays a big part of that. You have to make sure that your attribution provider is in lockstep with you, because if you're getting, if you're diluting your CPA because of ads that are not being seen, just because the attribution model's not recognizing that, you're in a lot of trouble. So work with the Moats of the world, work with your attribution provider and you find what that right equilibrium is. It's not a one-size-fits-all today. It depends on the vertical, and it does depend on the campaign, which is why it's important to first establish that benchmark. Talking about Group M and WPP and their definition, it does, for those of you that aren't aware of this, they do have a different definition. I think it's 100% of an ad has to be shown for 0 seconds. So even if it pops on the page and it has to be 100% in view, to me, I think we're still in the Wild West, and MRC is a good first step. I don't think it's the one-size-fits-all, and I don't think it's going to go in that direction. What I do believe is that there are going to be variable settings, and WPP is going to be setting that setting, and Aegis could be holding another one, Dentsu could be holding another one. I think it's a good first step in starting that conversation that we know that viewability is important. Again, I think fast forward into the future, 5 years, I think there's going to be a standardization across the board, and we're just not going to have to take it. We'll just take it for granted that everything's viewable for the most part, and we'll focus on getting that attention from the consumer, not just having the ad being in view. But I would say over the next couple of years, I would expect a vary of settings depending on not even holding company, but vertical, advertiser, campaign.
Rohit, you had a question?
Rohit from Digiday, Los Angeles. I guess what would you say is the biggest hurdle as we're going from the impression economy towards the attention economy? What is the biggest hurdle from, let's say, a big publisher just saying, fuck it, we're going to cut 70% of all of our impressions and just go all high impact and just raise our prices by 7 times? Like, why is nobody doing that yet?
I think they're going in that direction because now that there's these monitoring technologies that is giving value and credit to those publishers that are getting their ads seen, I think it just comes, I hate to say the word economics again, and I think that's probably on your buzz card bingo, but it's one of those things is publishers and good publishers are going to go where the money is, and they're going to do their site designs in a way to maximize yield on not just their display, but on their mobile as well and video as well. So I think we're going to see this evolution of the publisher community over the next 2 years to design these outlines, design content to be as engaging as it can be so they can maximize their profits. And I think we're going to see that reflected in the exchanges.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.